Thanks, Jacob. I guess first bit of background, I spent about 8 years working for a technology company that really sold technology and infrastructure to cities across the United States, Canada, Europe. And cities are good at buying buildings and construction, but they weren't very good at buying technology. And a lot of other tech companies died along the way. We bought them, they might have had better technology. But I'm making an argument towards, I think, what Jacob was talking about having a voice in process, hard negotiating, government relations, media and public relations. And that was something that we did very well. By the time I left there, I was general counsel of the company. I was part of the executive team. We had 1,000 employees worldwide. We're part of a public company listed on the TSE, and we formed about 40% of the company. Now in private practice, I also have some microfit clients and other energy clients. And so first, I think, in looking at the slides here, I'll give you more example. You can read the bullets, but we had a West Coast deal where we're selling to a city. The funding came from a regional level. The city was involved with the procurement and the legals, and the people who were taking on the technology was quasi-government. It was the busing company that would actually take on the infrastructure. We thought that we'd have a deal done in 6 months and start moving on the project. I'd say we still negotiated a pretty good deal given the complexities. The funding took a year to get approved. And then from the time we dropped the contracts, they weren't looked at for about 6 months. 6 months later, we flew out to deal with the contracts and closed it about a week later. So 2 years later, what happens? We priced 2 years earlier thinking that we were going to have a deal within 6 months. Our pricing was off by 6 months. We sat for a long time on that. And then we had to negotiate really hard for a deal because we're already bleeding money on the front end of that deal. Now, I think we did projects very well, so we did okay. In contrast, the same city had deals with competitors of ours who had died or been bought out, and some of their projects. There's one company we bought where they're sitting on about 10 or 15 projects that were scoped for in the range of 1.5 to 2 years, and some had been sitting unfinished for 5 years, a few were 7 to 10 years. So that is a more mature industry, I think, than this industry here in Ontario. And even there, if you're dealing with government, if you have multiple channels of government that you're dealing with, and there's lots of administration involved with that, government tends to be consensual decision makers, which means everyone on their end has to be on board, and they don't tend to like to consult outwards. Then if you're not dealing well with that, then you have a problem. So then, in terms of the small players part, I think the first two bullets are self-explanatory. If you're a small player, 10 to 15 employees, private, you have tight cash flows, you're vulnerable. I think the second two, coming back to my example of the West Coast deal, our technology would save the city we're selling to literally hundreds of thousands of dollars year over year. It was self-explanatory. But that wasn't working for us. Our company was heavily involved in government relations and networking. We've done it for years and years. So we had stakeholders at that table who were championing for us. And so on a tough deal like that, we brought that to bear, got involved, and I think turned it around. In contrast, some of our competitors hadn't had the same experience. Now, taking from that example, moving to the fit bottlenecks and looking at my own clients, really in the fit context, what I'm hearing back is that, look, the mandate for this program is to create an industry and to create jobs. But if I'm a buyer, at some level I want certainty. So what my clients are saying is that, look, if you can't give certainty about when fit price changes are coming, if you've got no certainty around when your grid connections are getting done, and there's no rhyme or reason to what LDCs want in terms of line diagrams and or municipalities in terms of permitting, there's an uncertainty there, and that's not good for the players. So, how do you change that? I think here, I want to speak to becoming a stakeholder, create voices. I think a lot of the people in this nascent industry, they're small players, and so if you want to be heard, you got to work together. So networking equals education and opportunities. In contrast to our own experiences, the tech companies that survived in selling to government, it's a smaller playing field than it was 10 years ago. But our competitors are also guys we do a lot of business with, and so we network with them. We're in the same lobby groups. We had fights with them, but at the same time, there were common interests in dealing with the type of industry that we're in. where we got aligned and worked together. And that worked well, and I think it's something that Jacob and Graham are talking about. Always better to have more channels. I guess, look, if you're in an industry, it's good to have all sorts of different organizations advocating within that industry. And from my perspective, I guess, I wonder where the small PV developer voice is. That's the type of client I have. CanSIA has a federal mandate. OSIA works not only on PV, but other areas. So it was just a thought that I had, and I thought I'd put it up there. I guess in coming back to creating voice and channels, can we look at other examples? I think the construction industry was an area I found interesting. Our firm is a member of the Toronto Construction Association, and I thought I'd read something from their page that was interesting. It says here, in 1867, it was founded by 58 Canadian construction industry executives. Now, 140 years later, they have 2,200 member companies representing something approaching 300,000 local construction industry practitioners. And then the other piece of it is, well, that's a lot of power, and I know Tim Hudak actually went to speak to them along with all the other speakers. Tim Hudak's not a favorite in our industry, but the fact is that organization had the ear of government. And then another thing that's mentioned is that if you're part of the TCA, you're also an integrated member with the Canadian Construction Association and the Council of Ontario Construction Association. So what it says is that you can have multiple organizations representing your interests, and I think what Graham and Jacob are talking about is a PV voice, and I thought that was interesting for my clients. And then I guess really my point, I guess, is to hone that. From my own experience, it's good to have a voice in government, and you can count on great ideas to some level, but if you're dealing with government, you're dealing with process, then you also got to be able to speak to that process, have a place at the table, and the way to do that is to either you're powerful enough that you have that voice, or if not, you collectively create a single voice for discrete objectives. So that's all I've got to say right now. Thanks a lot.